My friends, welcome to Cage Talk. I'm Robin Black. These are the long-form chats that we had related to the Ultimate Fighter episode of Dark Side of the Cage, and they're here for you in their entirety, and I hope you enjoy. My guy, Mike Goldberg. Love you, man. It's great to see you again.
I love you too, my brother, Robin Black. Truly one of the best in the business. And I do have to say to you, and I've said it to you many times, your breakdowns and the way that you take the physical and the mental and break them down, and then a bink or two are as good as anything out there in combat sports. And, we met many times. I think the first interview we ever did was with Bob Torrens, when you came over and you were working with DAZN Bellator and you interviewed me. And I remember saying, like, I always knew Robin, but man, he has really good questions. Wow. And this dude is smart. So much love to you. Huge respect for you since the day I met you. The only thing better than your breakdowns are you as a human being. So it's always a pleasure, bud.
My brother, thank you so much. And you're the best. You're the best there is, and you're the kindest guy, and I can't thank you enough. And thank you for the kind words, and thank you for hanging with me. And nobody judged me for leaving that in this. Nobody judged me for leaving that in this.
I'm the one who said it, so please
I love Mike, and it means the world to me. And I mostly just want my daughter to see that one day.
Play it twice.
Yeah, Mike, thank you so much. And thank you for being in the Dark Side of the Cage episodes. This podcast, we're chatting about the Ultimate Fighter episode. And it was an interesting one because up until that point in the season, it's an individual person's story. Kimbo's story, Evan Tanner's story. This one is the story of a company overcoming things, a company like fighting to survive, correct?
Absolutely. A company that, if you talk to Lorenzo, I want to say it was 60 million in the hole, maybe 50 million. And there was that phone call that many people have heard the story, and you obviously know. There was a phone call one night. Lorenzo called Dana and he said, hey, you know what? We put a lot of money into this. We gave it a run, but we can't get out of that niche audience. We can't get people to understand what truly makes a mixed martial artist and what type of athletes and what type of people that we have fighting for a living. And he said, I'm going to give it till the morning, but this might be it. We might pull the plug here and see who can take it over. Then Craig Pelegian comes in with this idea of a reality show. And oh, by the way, Spike wasn't paying back then, and either was Pelegian. So it was another $10 million out of the Zuffa pocket to produce season 1 of The Ultimate Fighter. Now, years later, it translated to 4.2 billion. So I think it worked out very, very well.
Yeah, it's a wild one. And I mean, at the time, a TV exec or an expert in the business would have said, this is a terrible idea. You're going to pay money to go on a small network to show people under the hood of cage fighting. There would have been a lot of so-called experts that said it was a bad idea.
Absolutely. But what it was the best idea ever, because the world started to understand that these guys weren't coming from the street, and they weren't just thugs, and they weren't street fighters, and they weren't tough man competitors, that they all had a story. They had a personality. They put everything into their fighting, but they also put everything into their family. Bobby Southworth trying to get out of the sauna and just cussing out Chuck. I'm like, damn, even with the glass in between, you can't talk to Chuck Liddell like that, Bobby. You're not going to fight. You're going to make weight, but then Chuck's going to kick your ass. And just the personalities that we saw. Josh Koscheck, and as people would make fun of me using this word, all the tomfoolery that we saw from Josh Koscheck, and then the battle of wit between Forrest and Stefan, and up and down the line, the Alex Karalexis and the Josh Rafferty, who came as that Cincinnati kid after Rich Franklin had kind of put Cincinnati and MMA on the map. So it was the greatest because people started to understand that these were athletes, and these were high level athletes who had great discipline in and out of the cage. And it started giving people a reason more so to either wear like the white hat or the black hat. So Tito was the first. Tito will be the all-time best. But Josh Koscheck, coming off that show, became the guy wearing the black hat. So you would watch Josh Koscheck fight either to see him win or to see him get his ass kicked. And that's how it always was for Tito. But you know what you did with Tito? If you wanted to see him win or wanted to see him get pummeled, you pressed that button and you bought the pay-per-view. Yeah. And so it was a great way to get to the mainstream media. And what it started to me, Robin, was the way that the WWE, WWF back in the day always marketed themselves. They gave you some backstories. They gave you some freebies, another freebie. And then once every storyline was there, bam, they hooked you on WrestleMania. Yeah. And it was brilliant. And so that pattern is one that eventually with FS1 and the things that took over from there, all the periphery programming, that was the start of getting to know the athletes and understanding those who compete in mixed martial arts. And at that time, of course, specifically in the UFC.
You know, you and I chatted for the Diego episode, and a friend of mine reached out and said that we sounded like two old guys saying, "Get off my lawn," when we were talking about how much better it was, how great that era was, right? You know, and it was, though. That's the thing. It was a really different time, far less corporate, far less structured, you know, less formal, if you will. And same thing when you're talking about this era. Today, these kids are all unique individuals.
No question.
But something about the speed of the presentation, you don't get to see the amount of identity of like a Chris Lieben. Like at that time, when you would look and you'd be, I don't know anyone like Chris Lieben. I still don't know anyone like Chris Lieben. And so we were able to really show the individuality of the human behind the fighting at that time.
Chris Lieben, you could say there's a lot of similarities between Diego Sanchez and Chris Lieben, just in that attitude. And I remember always talking to Chael about the foot. Every time we would call a fight together and there was a foot stomp, he would talk about it. And I said, "Hey, Chris used to foot stomp you every day in practice." I said, that anger you? He said, "Of course it did, Goldie." I said, "Well, what'd you do?" He goes, "I foot stomped him right back." So you did have the crippler, and you had a kid like Mike Swick, who, if you looked at him, skinny, handsome, athletic, of course, but he was a great fighter. So you saw that person emerge. You saw, of course, Kenny Florian emerge. You saw Nate Quarry, who was an all-American guy. Like he was, if Randy's Captain America, then Nate is Captain America's first assistant when you look at Nate Quarry. So all the different personalities, even the Sam Hogars and all the guys who we kind of didn't see after that, they all provided us entertainment. And I have to say, whoever sat down, or the group that sat down and put together that cast for the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, is the greatest casting agency in the history of casting agencies, because the personalities just jumped off the screen.
You're right. Yeah, I never thought of that so specifically, but you almost picture it now, and it's just primary colors, just red and blue and white and black, like just the brightest colors, yellow, beaming gold, like just no subtlety. They were all each so individual. During this episode, it kind of follows these, and it follows the showing of it, but it also kind of follows a little bit about behind the scenes of the business. And today, people watch a Shark Tank, or people know more about business than they did back then. But I think that part of that makes this a fascinating episode, seeing under the hood of a company, as you said, that's now worth $4 billion, trying to survive, almost death.
There's no question. And let's say the finale was still good fights, but it was the fight that all of a sudden propelled MMA to where it is today. And obviously where it grew massively at a just accelerated pace in what Lorenzo used to call eventually the global takeover of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And it was, though, and I believe from that first season, myself at least, I enjoyed all the stuff in the house more than the fights, because I called a ton of fights. Doesn't mean I didn't love the fights, but I liked everything in the storylines and seeing behind the scenes and the training and the slamming of the doors and the sauna and everything that came with it. And what Stefan was mad because somebody stole was a cucumber, or my friend Stefan Bonner, may you rest in peace. I love that guy. It just broke my heart, still does every single day. But you saw that kind of stuff. And dudes that were going to fight each other living in the same house. Like, do you mean mug them? Are you nice to them? Do you separate them? Do you push them every time? Do you give them the Diego Sanchez look? What do you do? What do you do? And I really did. I enjoyed that part of The Ultimate Fighter season 1 more than the actual fights. And I watched it as a fan, Robin. I waited because obviously I could have found out about all the results, but I didn't want to. I waited and I watched it as a fan, and I absolutely loved how the show built to that crescendo.
I love that, man. That is so you. That is so you to just enjoy the whole process of it. That's beautiful. You did mention Stefan, and right now we're in the Ultimate Fighter episode. So this is episode 4 of season 1 of Dark Side of the Cage. So I hope by this point people see that, and people have watched Dark Side of the Ring and some of the other Dark Side of comedy and stuff, so they know that we're not just looking for the worst. You know, in fact, many of these stories are quite inspiring as we look behind the curtain. I say that because whether it's if there is a season 2 or a season 3, I'd like to look at Stefan. And, when somebody dies too young, that in and of itself is tragic enough that you can do an episode. Dark Side of Kimbo Slice, if people saw it, the real dark aspect is that he passed away. No, Kimbo was a beloved character, and Stefan the same. I'm not hoping that we can look underneath and find insects and cockroaches and terrible parts of his story, but I'd love to tell his story because he was a very rare and special martial artist and human being. Correct?
The American Psycho. The American Psycho. Here's my take on it, is that when we had 2 contracts given in that finale, both to Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonnar, I think at that point, us in the MMA world thought they would come out and be on equal paths. And eventually opportunities came Stefan's way, title, whatever it was, and they did not go his way. Forrest all of a sudden went on this meteoric rise. And I feel like Stefan wasn't comparing Forrest's journey to his, but he was, because they came out as equals. And as things kind of started to not go Stefan's way, more so than anything in fights, but also in the embracement of the fans and everything, it hurt him. He was an emotional guy. It bothered him. It hurt him. It led to him making some bad, training decisions in what he put in his body. And the more he fought, the harder he fought, it seemed like the further he fell behind Forrest. Now, there's many things we could think of with Stefan. I knew him as well as anybody. The smile was always on the face of Stephan Bonnar. I have a great picture of him cooking kangaroo on a little mini grill in his room in Australia. And it smelled up the entire floor of the hotel in Sydney, Australia. But I do believe there was a Tito, there was a Forrest, Stefan. Forrest, Stefan. And it's not Forrest's fault, because Forrest did win the world championships. But that is something that I think really hurt Stefan, is they came out as equals, but quickly Stefan was in a big shadow cast upon him by Forrest Griffin.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to find there at any point in people's lives when things go south or off. There's tough periods, but through his path, like, people loved Stephan Bonnar. The people who know him, until the last few years of his life where people make mistakes, during his path, you won't find somebody to say a bad word about him. Yeah, I mean, when you take a group of people, a large group of people, risk takers and adventurers and people who live outside of the norms, not everybody's story is going to end up happy, you know?
Correct.
But that's a
Correct.
sad one. That really is a sad one.
It's one of too many. You know, he wasn't on the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, and I'll try not to get emotional, but, you know, AJ, as I always called him until he fought Rumble, and him going so young, it's I've gotten too many of those, oh my gods. And Kevin Randleman, a good Buckeye, Ohio State, the Ohio State University, and Kimbo, of course. I mean, it's an absolute shame. And just stepping into another season of The Ultimate Fighter, when Kimbo competed, here's what I will always take when I think of Kimbo Slice. This was a man who already had his money on YouTube. He could strike with anyone, but he went to a house with a bunch of snotty-nosed kids with no knees left and tried to wrestle as much as he could wrestle, tried to work Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as much as he could, maybe just to prevent being taken down, to prevent being submitted, but he embraced all the aspects of mixed martial arts. And I always respected that from Kimbo Slice. He didn't just do it his way. There's others that did, and he was in the WWE, very prominent. We know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But Kimbo was willing to do that, and I have the utmost respect for that part of Kimbo Slice. And when I got a chance to call some baby Slice fights, that's exactly what I told his son. And he was very, very thankful for my thoughts and sharing my thoughts about his father with him.
You know, there's so many things I love about you, Mike Goldberg, but among them, you know, you just won't let our conversation end on a dark thing. And there's no nicer way, there's no better way to make somebody happy around the world of fighting than to bring up Kimbo, one of the most beloved people of all time, just like yourself, my friend.
Thank you. And, you know, and now with obviously BYB, that's Dada 5000. Dada 5000. It was his triangle in the backyard in the poor parts of Miami, where he basically said, hey, dudes, put your guns away, put your knives away. Let's settle this in a fight. And you know what he did? I mean, now you see BYB, but what he did was he prevented a lot of deaths or potential deaths in the part of the world in which he grew up in South Florida. You know, obviously the heart and everything and the Bellator disappointment, but not many people know that Kimbo and Dada are cousins, even though it never seemed like it because they were both kind of the same character. They're cousins. And Dada 5000 is exactly, getting to that positive finish for you, Robin, is exactly like Kimbo. He is the biggest teddy bear you will ever meet, but he is the guy that you will never want to fight. And this is the guy I've always talked about. Brian Stan, the man you want your daughter to marry, but you never want your son to fight. Plain and simple.
Love it. Lots of love to Brian Stan and to Dada. Of course, Mike, I'm so happy you brought it up. You are the voice of BYB Extreme, which is just a brilliant bare knuckle boxing show. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I'm so glad we got to mention it here. BYB Extreme in a triangle, some of the best fighting on planet Earth. Of course, you can see Mike Goldberg there. And I'm a good friend and fan of the show. I've worked on it with you before, and I hope to in the future, brother.
I hope so too, because that show that you, Paulie, and I did in London was absolutely brilliant. And what did you call the body shot? It was the
poison arrow.
Yes, the poison arrow. And I swear, you know, between calling JD Burns, JD Drew, like Paulie did, and the poison arrow, those are things he brings up absolutely all the time. And there's the poison arrow, and there's Shaquille O'Neal calling Paulie Maggiano. So Paulie also is very wealthy because of his restaurants, I suppose.
For all our friends that are watching this, thank you for letting us share some personal stories, and thank you for hanging in here with us while we do so. It's our privilege to be able to share some stories here while you're watching us chat about the Ultimate Fighter episode. Thanks, Mike Goldberg. I'm going to pull you in again for another one
I know
this
you are.
season, but it is so great to see you, my brother. Love to your family.
Thank you, and much love to your family, and a huge thank you to everyone at Vice, to you for hooking me up with the great people at Vice, because you know what, it's not easy not being the man at the UFC anymore. I mean, it breaks my heart, but what this opportunity did was it allowed me to take a look at the forest instead of being in the trees, Robin, and it has been nothing but joyful for me to be able to look back and for people to remind me that, Goldie, you were a big part of it. And that's not ego talking at all. That's just a man who loves people and doesn't mind getting some love back. So thank you very much. Here we go, 2025. You and I are working together a lot. That's my prediction. That's my New Year's resolution.
Big.
Big.
All right, Nate, thanks for hanging out with me, man. How are you?
My pleasure. Thanks for the call.
So you sat down and talked with Vice about The Ultimate Fighter Season 1. What was, when you think back to that, was it a weird experience? What was it like?
Oh my God, it was so weird. I always tell people it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Being the first season and not really people that would watch reality TV, we had no idea what we were in for. Didn't know if there was going to be fights, just the insanity. And as I describe it to people, it's you take 16 idiots, lock them in a house, and see who's the toughest at the end of the day, and let the games begin.
When I reached out to you to sit down and chat with us about it, you described yourself as the adult in the room at the time. Did you feel like it?
I feel like that in most rooms, to be honest.
Yeah. But that
with the craziness that went on, to me, I saw it as such a great opportunity, possibly my final opportunity to become a professional MMA, make a career out of this. And so I'm very goal oriented. When I know where I'm going, when I know what I'm trying to do, that's it. From the very first night, everybody in the house is drinking and partying and hanging out, and they cut to me. I'm sitting in the backyard next to the pool, just mentally trying to prepare for what the next 6 or 7 weeks, we didn't even have any idea how long we were going to be there, but just trying to figure out what was going to be coming our way and what I could do to best be prepared for it.
I fought pro MMA, but at a much lower level. But I remember when I was getting ready to fight, I didn't know my opponent, and I looked, and the day of weigh-ins, I saw him smoking a cigarette. And I remember thinking, okay, this is a good thing. Did you have that thought when you were watching these idiots pounding straight liquor?
Well, it's such a small community, and we knew that the UFC was trying to pick some of the best unsigned guys around the country. So we knew who a lot of these guys were. I mean, Swick and Lieben had already fought. So I knew that there was going to be, no matter what the shenanigans were from the beginning, and I knew it was going to be tough. And I always prepared for every fight like it was the most important fight of my career, because to me, every single fight was. I can't imagine going to a fight saying, win or lose, I'll be okay. No, you don't want that L on your record. You go in, you try to put on the best performance possible, and that means being ready. And just that mindset saved me a lot of times, because back in the day, I would show up to watch fights, and a promoter would come up to me and say, "Hey, you're here. What do you weigh?" I'd be like, and I remember one time I said, like 205 something. And he goes, "Okay, don't eat anything. I think I got somebody who'll fight you." All right. And the next night I ended up being the main event and knocking somebody out in the first round. It was just always being ready to fight, always taking every fight very seriously, was just kind of my recipe for success.
I spoke with Greg Jackson about this for the Diego Sanchez episode, and I've chatted with so many. I'm a nerd for those old days where literally you would drive, 900 miles to learn from a purple belt, to learn one move from a purple belt. And you'd show up at a fighting event and they'd say, okay, that guy's the toughest bouncer in town, you're going to fight him. But it was a wild, completely different time. It's really hard to explain to these young kids who kind of see this professional athleticism now, right?
Yeah, back in the day, half the time I didn't know who I was fighting until I saw them across the ring or across the cage. I think I was fighting in Gladiator Challenge, or maybe it was King of the Cage. I think it might have been King of the Cage at an Indian casino someplace in the middle of nowhere, which was the way it usually was because it was still illegal in most states, but flew down to LAX and then had to drive all the way to the casino. We're passing airports that are closer to the casino than LAX was. The promoter just didn't want to spend the extra $50 to get me closer. And so fly down, drive another 4 or 5 hours to the casino, meet with the promoter. He says, all right, so we're going to have the rules meeting at 1. So we'll want you here for that. I'm like, okay. So I'm planning my whole day. Okay, we're going to go to the hotel. We're going to check in, drop off our bags, go back to the casino, hit the rules meeting. That'll be done about 1:30, maybe 2. Drive back to the hotel, get some food, take a nap. Then I'm good to go. So I show up at the casino at 1. Nobody else is there. No fighters, promoters nowhere to be found. So I hang out for half an hour. Finally, I find somebody and said, yo, the rules meeting is supposed to be a half an hour ago. What's going on? He goes, oh yeah, no one ever shows up on time. So we just have it whenever everybody's here. I was like, are you kidding me? So I'm the one responsible fighter that's here on time, and you're making me sit outside in the desert, in the heat, when I'm starving, when I'm tired, waiting for those guys that'll, just show up whenever, just to be told the rules I've already fought under and I've known for years. I'm out. And just left, went back to the hotel. And then I couldn't get a nap. The time was too late. Barely got some food. It was just, back then, it was ridiculous. I fought in a card where, and I fought, somebody that made it into the UFC, whose name just always escapes me. The referee, the judges, and the timekeeper were chosen out of the crowd. These were buddies of the promoter that showed up. They bought a ticket to watch the fights, and the promoter goes up to them and says, hey, I think this referee shirt will fit you. Will you ref the fights tonight?
Oh, Jesus.
And the guy's like, dude, I've never done that before. I don't know what he had trained a little bit, but obviously not as a referee. The judges and the timekeeper, same thing, buddies of the promoter. The timekeeper ended up bumping the clock in the first round. This is how crazy it was. It's supposed to be a 15-minute first round and then a 5-minute overtime. I've never heard of any place else that had something like that. Well, the timekeeper bumped the clock. We fought for 22 minutes straight and then came back out for a 5-minute overtime. Mike Whitehead was my opponent. And every time I'd slap a triangle on him, he'd push me through the ropes, try to punch me through the ropes. At one time, he's trying to crawl underneath the ropes to escape as I'm on his back. It was just a completely different time. And this is another one of those situations where all I can say is, regulation actually makes things better and safer. It may make things a little bit harder for those trying to put on the business, but for those of us that you're actually making do the work, it's a lot better for us.
The Ultimate Fighter was a crazy season. You didn't even know what to expect. And then what about the actual finale? What was that like?
So after the Ultimate Fighter, or as people imagine after the big show, it's all peaches and creams. You won that big fight. I think if you've watched any of the Rocky movies, at least to number 5, you kind of realize that's probably not always the case. A lot of us got into fighting to deal with some issues that we may have had in childhood, and it was easier than going to therapy and talking about your problems, getting punched in the face for some reason. So it's not all peaches and creams. I made it into the UFC. I wasn't able to fight during the season of the Ultimate Fighter. I got injured, so I never got to show my skills as to why I was there in the first place. The first ultimate finale, they had the entire card fight. Unfortunately, they only showed uh, Diego and Kenny Florian, Stefan and Forrest, and then the main event was Rich Franklin and Ken Shamrock. Well, all the rest of us fought on the undercard, which didn't air that night, which was really depressing, distressing for me, and which was really hilarious being there live after Forrest and Stefan fought. Everybody started leaving. They didn't know Rich and Ken and didn't really care about the fight. So that was kind of funny to me that the most accomplished fighters that are the main event here, nobody really cared about because they didn't know them, and that really led to me to thinking about how what the Ultimate Fighter really did was introduce to people who we are, that we have struggles, that we have motivations. You're going to root for somebody, root against somebody, but making it into the UFC. And then I went on a 4-fight streak, first 3 fights winning by first round knockout, got my title shot, lost that by first round knockout, and then ended up getting a spinal fusion surgery, had 22-month layoff, came back, had a brutal war that I ended with a knockout in that one. So for me, my career went okay. In UFC, I was 7-3. Overall, my record was 18-4. I ended up with a sponsorship for the company that did my back surgery. I was a spokesman for them for many years. One of my sponsors that I worked with as well, we're still business partners to this day, managing real estate, things like that. So for me, I really don't have too many complaints. The hardest thing to deal with right now is just the aches and pains. I've got 19 screws in my body. I lost count at how many surgeries I had when I got past 10. Right pectoral's been torn off, left bicep torn off, left ankle broken, 2 spinal fusions, face reconstructed a few times. Just a lot of damage and injuries. But as far as the fighters go, I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones. I have a wonderful wife, and I was fighting for my daughter before. Well, now she's grown up and moved out. Well, now I've got 3 other kids that I'm taking care of. So that's exhausting all the time.
What was some of the fallout from Tough? Like years later, where are some of the people now, and where did that lead?
After the fights, out of the 16 guys on the show, we've already lost 2 of them. Loden Sincade has passed. I still don't know why. I never heard any reasons of why he passed, and passed at such a young age. Stefan Bonner as well, passing. It sounded to me like it was some substance abuse possibly, and that it can be such a dangerous thing for guys to get into because you're suffering from so much pain, and potentially you need surgeries. Maybe you don't have surgery, can't, or don't have insurance, can't afford the insurance. It's a very difficult thing. I look at compared to like athletes in the NFL whose average career is roughly 3 years or so. The minimum pay for them, well, I just looked this up, it was somewhere around $700,000-$800,000 a year. So you're the worst player in the NFL, you're making $700,000. You're done when you're 25. You get out of college at 22, 3-year career. 25, you have a college degree, you just made $1.5 million, couple $1 million. You're still a young man, you can move on with your other dreams, goals, and that's it for you for football. Whereas in MMA, there's always this thing that you're reaching for that, to be honest, most guys will never achieve. And so they end up fighting way past their prime, taking fights they shouldn't take. I mean, just look at Muhammad Ali. As great as he was and all the things that he accomplished, he still felt the need to continue fighting well into advanced age when he shouldn't have. And it had really detrimental effects on him as he got older. So it's just not an easy road. As I tell the upcomers, train because you love it. If you want to fight and experience it, go for it. I think it's an important thing. Everybody should kind of test themselves in that manner, find out what kind of a person they are when they step in that ring. If it's something you enjoy, if it's something you're good at, follow through. But always have an exit strategy. Where are you going to go when this ride ends? Because let's say you're 35, you've taken a few beatings. Now the big show cut you. The smaller shows are the only ones that are interested. Former UFC fighter fighting for $2,000 on this card. That's not going to pay a month's bills, put along your training camp and all the expenses and all that kind of thing.
For you, man, life after tough and life after fighting, you're up to a ton of things. Tell me about some of the things you're doing.
Since retiring from fighting, I continued on as a spokesman for the company that did my back surgery for quite a few years. When I had that, it was a spinal fusion. I was told by people, if you get back surgery, not only is your career over, your life is over, you'll never be the same. But I knew if I didn't get surgery, I knew the pathway I was going to be on. Just broken and crippled, unable to pick up my kids, barely able to walk. After getting my surgery and then returning to fight in the UFC, I became the spokesman for what's possible after back surgery. So I worked with them for several years. I've been doing real estate, built a few homes here and there, run some rentals. For me, I just want a peaceful life now. It's been a lot of fighting, a lot of pain. I'm not trying to take over the world.
I'm sure this lawsuit has been just a crazy road, and I'm sure you didn't expect it to take this long.
Unfortunately, it feels like I keep getting dragged back into things on occasion. We went to Washington, D.C. 7, 8 years ago to work towards passing the Ollie Expansion Act that would protect MMA fighters like the Ollie Act does. Of course, promoters hate that kind of thing. They don't want the employees, the workers, the independent workers, as they would say, to have any rights whatsoever. The UFC wants to dictate who you fight, where you fight, when you fight. You have to tell them where you are at all times, what kind of clothes you can wear, what you can say, what you can do. They want to control everything, and giving any of that power back to the actual workers, well, that's not good for the people that are worth billions of dollars that are running the show. And so when we had a change of occupancy in the White House and Donald Trump took over, our bill was immediately killed, which of course was championed by Republican Congressman Markwayne Mullin, who said that this was his baby. His goal was to give fighters the protections that he didn't have when he was fighting. Wow. Well, now he is just completely in the MAGA camp there with Trump, has stated that he will not reintroduce the bill. Now, Senator Markwayne Mullin has made it clear that Trump does not want the fighters to have any protections whatsoever, because you'll see Dana White is always at Trump's parties, his balls, all that kind of stuff. The billionaires that are running things, not even behind the scenes anymore, just wide open, controlling things. So I don't know if we'll ever be able to get that passed. If so, it's going to take again a change in the White House. Again, Senator Mullin said that he would not support the bill as long as Trump was around. And quite frankly, I think the UFC is paying them too much money to even consider doing something for the people. And that's quite a shame to see all the work that we had done completely fall apart. We were still able to be somewhat victorious in our lawsuit against the UFC. Trump's DOJ tried to shut us down many times, but we were able to prevail. We had a lawyer or a judge that seemed to really understand the things that we were saying, the monopsonistic practices that the UFC had. To the judge, it was a very clear, open and shut case. So we were able to come to a conclusion with that, settled on that case. A lot of people thought, it was funny, a lot of people thought that nothing like that would ever happen. We'd never gain a victory against the UFC. And as soon as we do, then everybody says, well, we're sellouts for just taking money from the UFC and not changing the sport. Of course, none of them were in the rooms when we were making these decisions. They didn't meet with our lawyers. I've been called personally a sellout, a hack, that I was paid behind the scenes. The lawyers made all the money. None of the fighters are going to get anything. So when the checks start going out July of this year, I hope to shut up some of those people. Of course, I'm sure they'll figure out some reason why they're still right and I'm still a hack or something like that. But it's been really interesting to me to see how silent it was and how empty the courtroom was while we were there in court day after day, week after week, year after year. And now that there's a promise of checks coming, all those people were supporting us the entire time. So thanks for all
Yeah.
that silent support, guys.
Yeah.
I hope you are proud of yourselves when you see yourselves in the mirror in the morning. Stand up for what you believe is right, regardless of the circumstances. And at the very least, you'll be proud of your actions.
Then you've got some pet projects too. Zombies?
Zombie Cage Fighter, which is my comic book graphic novel that I've done. It's the story of my life plus zombies. One of my amazing shirts that I have. I've just been so fortunate with this project. I wrote it. I sat down, told my story with a horror aspect, putting in zombies. In my UFC career, my MMA career, I did okay. I came out all right. But in the zombie cage fighting world, I never quite make it over the hump. I'm still fighting in the small shows, way past my prime. And the promoter just says, look, man, we can't sell tickets on your name anymore. Nobody's excited to see you on the card. They think you should have retired a long time ago. And I just say, man, I'm a fighter. I don't know what else to do. And he says, well, you were a fighter, but if you still want to stay in the game, we've got these underground zombie cage fights you may be interested in.
Awesome.
And so as I was writing this, I wanted every fight scene to be very realistic. How would someone like myself fight a zombie? Brought in some of my personal favorites, Josh Barnett being one. He has a big fight scene in that. The artwork has just been incredible. I've been so lucky to get phenomenal artists to help me tell the story, some writers to help me break down my chicken scratch and make it a little bit more palatable for the book that it has become. And I've been in talks to do an animated series, to do movies, but it's all Hollywood talk. You just never know how it's going to pan out. It's just kind of making my way there. And the worst case scenario is I've told a really fun story that I'm winning over fans. My wife's childhood neighbors just got a copy. And so we're talking your average suburbanites who've never watched a fight, who work in white collar jobs, then sending her text saying, I was not expecting to be so emotionally involved in this story, and how much they enjoyed it. Wow. So I've been really happy with that. And I mentioned I got married, it's been like 7 years ago now. And somehow my wife just got pregnant and kept getting pregnant. So my boy just turned 5, my daughter just turned 3, and my other daughter is going to turn 2 in about a month. So this is one of those rare instances where I have a couple hours to myself in the house, because it's just bananas around here all the time.
I bet.
But it's so cool. My boy started taking jujitsu 3-4 months ago, and he just loves it. And it's so fun for me to be there, to be an assistant coach to the assistant coach, and help out in a small way, and just see how excited he is. And I just want him to have positive experiences if he continues training in jiu-jitsu or wrestling or whatever the case may be, because for me, a lot of it honestly was really negative. There was people, bad actors that did not have my best interests at heart for my career or my training, and just being somewhere to be there for my son or my daughters if they choose that pathway as well, and help them make smart decisions so they can be educated going into these things. And I see those mistakes being made to this day. And the UFC calls someone up, hey, we need a last minute guy to take on this fighter. We know this isn't who you've been training for, blah, blah, blah. So it'd be a huge favor for us. A fighter steps up, takes that fight, loses, and gets cut. Why? Because it's a business. And from the UFC side, it's always a business. The difference is that they play on your emotions when they're sending you that contract. Oh, you don't want to take this fight last minute against Godzilla in Tokyo? I guess you're scared. I thought you were tough. I thought you wanted to fight the best. I thought you wanted to be the best, but I guess you're not. Well, then the fighter has to stand up and go, hell no, I'm not going to take that. Yeah, I'll fight him. And then he gets eaten by Godzilla and shit out the next day, and everybody moves on.
Nate, thank you so much, man. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks for being part of this series. Thank you for hanging with me. Cage Talk, The Ultimate Fighter. Next week, Cage Talk. Next week is a big, big week for Dark Side of the Cage. There are still, 5, 6 killer episodes, but my favorite, and I think it's going to be a lot of people's favorites and going to blow a lot of minds, Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz, for reasons known only to him, was willing to sit down for us for a long-form interview and talk about his life. He doesn't do that very often, hasn't done it in years. Dark Side of the Cage, Nick Diaz is on Vice Wednesdays at, 10 p.m. or something. But next week, Cage Talk, all about Nick Diaz. Until then, enjoy the hostilities, my friends.
16 fighters, one house, and a UFC contract on the line.
The naysayers were everywhere.
They had no clue what they were in for.
It was literally like animals claiming their territory.
Ridiculous challenges.
They want us to fight for free.
You asked for alcohol, I was there within a half an hour. Are you surprised? We didn't know if it was gonna work.
This isn't a character, man. This is my life.
Dana pounded on the table and said, it's gonna be bigger than the NFL.
Dark Side of the Cage, Wednesdays at 10 on Vice.